here. Okay,
owns it?
so today we're going to, last week, what did we do? We went over buyer presentation, right? Buyer representation presentation. Have you guys thought about that at all? Or did you guys all block that out of your memories? And
Block
say,
it out and,
please?
and thinking, why would a buyer want to get involved in something like that? They would just bypass me and go right to the listing agent.
But they
And-
can't.
Yeah.
They go to the listing agent, they still have to sign one with the
Yeah,
listing
the
agent.
listing agent's gonna be more, it's got the bucks because they're gonna have all the money
Let me
from
ask
the.
this, is this gonna be like listing agents are gonna be, like, there's gonna be way more double ending, you think?
I mean, depends. It depends on how well we do telling buyers how wrong it is to go to a listing agent and get involved in dual agency. How are you gonna have somebody fully represent you? That's gonna be really difficult when somebody already has an agreement with the seller, and it's not gonna save the seller any money. The way that the contract's written, you'll see it here, and the way that the listing agreement's written, it really doesn't. Just because the listing agent's getting paid by the seller doesn't mean that the listing agent also isn't gonna wanna get paid by the buyer. Right? Because what happens if the buyer comes into your listing
Mhm.
and signs the agreement with you, but then decides, I don't really like the house, let's go look for something else. You better have an agreement in place that's gonna get you paid, otherwise you're gonna be working for next to nothing when they go out and look at another house. Right? So it's gonna be very interesting. There's going to be a lot of people that are gonna try to tweak this
Yeah,
and bend it and goof it up. I think for the first 6 months, we're gonna see all kinds of just really.
They're gonna
messy,
try to
messy
find
stuff.
ways around it.
Oh, yeah,
like,
they're gonna try
just
to find ways
come up
around
with really creative
That's
ways.
what I was concerned about is if I tell my buyer, okay, I can't take you to go look at this until we have this in writing, that somebody else might say, oh, no, we can do that later. I'll take you, even though I know that's could be illegal.
Mhm.
I just feel like there's already people that do things that aren't ethical or legal, so.
That word's gonna get around quick, right? They're gonna, well, so-and-so over that brokerage took me. Oh, really? Boom, violate. We're all gonna hit the violate button real quick on people like that, because we want to try to keep this playing field as even as possible. And again, remember, there's gonna be language in there that says, if you say, well, I need 2.5% to go show you houses for representation, and then Lacey goes, oh, I'll do it for $50. Right? Lacey goes out and shows them the house and the seller is willing to offer 2.5%. She can only collect $50. That's it. The overage goes back to the seller. So that's going to prevent agents from undercutting.
right.
Right? So that's a little bit of language that we're putting in all these contracts to make sure that stuff like
Unless the
that.
sellers aren't willing to pay the 2.5% though.
Yeah, so if the sellers aren't willing to pay the 2.5%, then the buyer has to be able to know that going in. So we'll see as we go through this representation agreement, there is going to be requirements on the buyer to prove to you that they have the capacity to pay you. Or if they don't, check the box. And if they check the box that says they don't have the capacity to pay you, then if you get into a situation where nobody's offering compensation and they've already checked the box that they can't pay you, you can step out and say, sorry, I'm not going to represent you. So you won't get trapped into working for free. So it's going to be,
But then you'll lose a buyer though.
well, what kind, I mean, a buyer that couldn't perform, right? A buyer that couldn't pay you. Like you were going to lose it anyway. You're either going to work for free, right? Or
Depends on the house they pick though, right?
correct. And so you will be able to say to buyers,
Or you want it-
if we pick this house, they won't pay me, you can't pay me, so you're gonna have to go in unrepresented. Are you cool with that, or should we just bypass this house and go find another one where I can actually
Do
represent?
you think that people think that representation is important?
I think over the years, we have diluted what it means to represent because, we have all these cute videos of all these agents driving their fancy cars and all the, not really telling people. We have a lot of agents going, ooh, look at me, I'm successful, instead of a lot of agents telling people the importance of representation. I think if we have a run of 6 months or a year where people are out there representing themselves, they're going to get a real wake up call to what it means to be unrepresented. I think they're going to be a little bit shocked. So there could be a reset when it comes to that. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, this is all just me hypothetically throwing that out there, but yeah, we have a hard enough time. We're all agents And how many of you have had a hard enough time or come across people who've had a hard enough time staying within the confines of the contract? Happens all the time. Now you put that on an unlicensed person who has emotion wrapped up into this whole thing, they're going to screw a lot of stuff up. So with that, buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. This is if you look up here in the top, it says draft V7, version 7. That means ever since we've started revising this for the July change, this is our 7th.
Oh my,
revision.
go around, oh my God.
Okay, because every time we revise it and then we hear, oh, wait, now we have the settlement and now we have this and now we have that. So we've gone back 7 times. And so this is the version that we're going to be looking at on, see, I go up Wednesday. So Thursday morning, we're going to be looking at this version one last time and putting the stamp of approval on it. And it will be released in the June release of form. So this one should be pretty darn close to the final. So you guys are getting a first-hand look at it here. Okay. So right to represent. So it's between the buyer and the buyer's broker. So it's between whoever you're taking out and Downtown Country Real Estate. It is going to default as non-exclusive. Okay, and that's the kind of the one that we really like. We really don't want to lock people up into exclusive. Non-exclusive is perfectly fine. We'll get to the definitions of both of them down below, but basically in a non-exclusive, we have to do work to prove our worth. And so we'll get to that. Now, here's the new thing. This is brand new, this one in red, the maximum. This came out in legislation that just dropped last week. So we just had to make this change. Maximum representation period allowed is 3 months from the date of this agreement. So 90 days is basically the cap. Now, we don't really know if it's 90 days or 3 months. What's the difference? Could be 1 or 2 days, right? If you have July and August, or if you have December and January involved, you're going to get a couple extra days in there. What we've heard so far is the term 3 months, but we don't know if it's going to switch to 90 days. So that could switch to 90 days, but 3 months is the maximum length for a buyer, unless they're a corporation, an LLC, or a partnership. Why? I don't know. That's just the way the law has been written at this point in time. So what's the maximum length of time you can have a listing? Anybody know? That law came out about beginning of the year. 2 years. 2 years is the maximum that you can hold a listing. That law took effect January 1. You used to be able to lock up people for as long as you wanted. Now it's maximum 2 years. This representation period is going to be 3 months with the ability to extend it one time for an additional 3 months. Okay, they just don't want you locking people in forever. Okay, the terms of the representation will be laid out below in the grid. And of course, as you know, with the grid, there's always this section here with the paragraph number that will relate to the section of text in the body below. So you pick your representation period. You have a beginning date and an end date. So they changed that. The old BRBC used to be for a number of days. You would put it starts on this and it lasts for 180 days, 256 days. The reason why they had the days on there is because they wanted people to see if you were trying to lock them up for 2 years, there'd be an absurd number up there, like 760 days or whatever, right? So now it's because it maxes out at 3 months, it's just a beginning date and an end date. Now, there is some language in here too that says if you try to write it for more than 3 months, that it terminates at the end of 3 months. It's void. It voids after anything longer than a 3-month period unless you do a proper extension. Okay, type of representation. It's going to be non-exclusive unless you opt into the exclusive. So it says if exclusive is checked, the broker is entitled to compensation if the buyer acquires property during the representation period with or without that broker's involvement.
Wow.
Even if another broker is also entitled to be paid for representing the buyer. So again, there's a big difference between non-exclusive and exclusive. In non-exclusive, we have to actively be participating in the acquisition of the home. In a exclusive, if they want to sign an exclusive with you, you get paid regardless, even if they go use a different broker and even sign a representation agreement with that broker, then they'd be responsible for paying 2 brokers. Okay. Okay, property to be acquired, right? We know this part, we've seen this before. So broker, including any associate licensee working through the broker or on behalf of the buyer, provides services for the types of properties and locations specified below. So it's going to default as single family residential, including condominiums, manufactured homes. And then for whatever reason, if you have somebody that wants to sign this with you and they're not looking for single family, they're only looking for vacant land or commercial or industrial, you can exclude the single family residential by checking this box down here. But we wanted to make sure that this is basically going to be used for single family residential, so it's going to default in. It's very important for us to mark these different things, because what happens if they say, you know, okay, we signed it for single family and they end up buying multi-unit, right? Or industrial. And then they come back to you and say, I don't have to pay you. That our agreement was just for single family. So that's why you have all these other check boxes here. If you think you're going to be out looking at multi or vacant land or whatever, go ahead and check all the appropriate boxes. County or counties, city or cities. You know, again, they removed the state, right? Anywhere in the state of California. That one doesn't work anymore. You know, have fun trying to list all 58 counties if you're trying to cover the state. They kind of look a little ridiculous, but for us, it's basically to be what? Which counties?
Kern.
And what else? Kern and LA,
Yeah.
right? Because we got possibility of going down the Antelope Valley. So I wouldn't even put cities, right? I don't want people arguing, well, what's Tehachapi? Tehachapi City and Bear Valley is not really, you know, just put in Kern County probably, or, you know, or if you want to, you could put the greater Tehachapi service area. Yeah, but I just would hate to see you guys getting into an argument over that type of thing. And then any additional description, if you needed it, it's kind of just there. I don't think that's really ever going to come into play. Or the following specified properties only. What would we use that for?
For the day of the showing to prove ourselves that they like to hang out, like work with us.
Yeah, so if they don't want to sign up for us for, you know, the whole county, right? Maybe they're showing, maybe they have somebody showing properties someplace else, or maybe they have multiple agreements in place. You can, you know, they're afraid, you'd be like, hey, you know, they're afraid to sign long-term with you. You could say, well, look, you want me to go show you these 4 properties today. You know, does it, first of all, I have to have a representation agreement with you to even show you these 4 properties. But isn't it fair that if I am the one negotiating one of these 4 properties with you, that I should be compensated for? Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So I'm going to put the list of those 4 properties here. I'm going to say the following properties only, and I'm going to put those addresses. Okay. So you could do it a number of ways. If you want, you could write out the entire address. You could just put the street number and the street name. Or if you want, you can put MLS numbers blank, you know.
That would probably be if you were showing 7 that.
9999 whatever, 9999 whatever. So you're not taking up this huge, massive amount of space, right?
If you put specific properties there, but up above you have a 90-day agreement or whatever. How does that work after you've shown them those, if they didn't like any of those?
To do another one?
So we're going to end up having to amend this all the time. It's going to be amended constantly. Instead of always filling out a new one of these, you can use the form MT, which is what we modify our listings with. That'll modify any agreement. So it also modify this as well. So you would just do an MT, and it's going to say, this is an amendment to the BRBC dated whatever date, the following additional properties, right? So they're just signing one document. That second time you take them out, or that third time you take them out, you're not having to redo an entire BRBC. Yeah, we're definitely aware of that. You can even just do a straight addendum to this if you wanted to. So you can do an MT, an ADM, either way would be fine. Okay, or if it's a, you know, huge list of properties, you could attach it on, you know, identified by the attached list, and you could just click that box and it would be like a text overflow addendum type of thing. You could attach a list of properties. Okay, a property is excluded from representation. Why would we have that box there?
If
The
they
buyer's seen it with other agents.
Exactly. The buyer's already seen it with other agents, already has an agreement with other agents. So that's, again, part of the conversation, Mr. Buyer. You want to go out and see with me today. I understand you may not have liked Realtor X, but did you sign an agreement with them? Yes, I did. Okay, for which properties? Well, it was property specific. I went and they showed me these 5 properties. Okay, well, during your representation period with that agent, they still carry the right to represent you if you go back to any one of those properties. So I need to identify them here so that I know that I have the ability to step out of this agreement.
What if they don't remember the purpose?
They should
mean,
have a
because that's
copy.
so
They should
likely-
be receiving copies of their BRBCs, or they need to be able to go back to that agent and say, please provide me with a copy of.
Can somebody cancel a BRBC?
You can, yes. The non-exclusive version only takes unilateral cancellation, meaning one person. Doesn't have to be a dual cancellation, just single cancellation. But there will be language in here that will help you preserve a period there. Similar to like a listing, you got 5 days to give them a list of properties that you've seen, and there's a retention period. And if they go into contract on any one of those properties that you provide them that list within your retention period, you become the agent that goes back into escrow with them. And they would have to tell any other person which houses that, so it's, so
Okay,
yeah.
what if like the person doesn't like the agent that showed them the house, but they really like the house?
So you could end up in a situation where, so let's say they're working with you.
Okay.
And they don't like you.
Right.
So they cancel with you and you have a retention period for 30 days and you give them a list of those properties. And then they go to Terry and they love Terry and they write an offer with Terry and they don't tell you and they don't notify Terry. And then you see that that property goes under contract, right? And then you find out that it's with them. You can also drop your BRBC off at the escrow office, and now they have 2 commissions to pay.
That kind of
Oh.
sucks for the buyer though.
Well, it does. It absolutely.
Yeah, so if
Sucks
if
for
they
the
don't get the
buyer.
waffle. They don't get the
Right, but
waffle.
then it's not guaranteed that.
So,
the
so if
agent-
you are that kind of agent that thinks, hey man, this really sucks for the buyer, when they cancel with you, you can say, hey, I have 0 retention period. I'm not going to provide you with the list of the houses that we saw. And then they're free to do whatever they want.
I would be that person, but I would be the one that they like, so.
You would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you reduce the retention period?
Yeah, the retention period is up for you to create. We'll get to it here. It's a little further down, but it's entirely up for you. It defaults at 0. So you have to actually put the number of days the retention period would be. Okay,
Is
all
there a
right.
maximum?
That's a good question. I don't know if
90
there's,
days?
I don't know if there's a maximum, and I'm trying to think, where do we? So let's see. So they call it continuation of right. It doesn't have a maximum. It just says blank calendar days after the representation period or any extension. So that's a really good point. I might want to take that back to the committee. And because we may have missed this part right here, because there could be in the legislation might determine that there could be a maximum. Because right now you can make it 365. You can make it anything. So this is your retention period. You see it defaults at 0. You would have to put it in there and have that conversation with them and say, if you cancel with me and I provide you this list for this period of time, this retention period here, we call it continuation of right, I could still maintain, the
Compensation.
right to get compensation, and you need to let any other broker that you enter an agreement with understand that for these properties, I got you. Okay, but again, that's gonna be a personal choice. There are gonna be agents out there that are gonna be uncomfortable having that conversation when their client doesn't like them. They're just gonna want to get out and they're gonna just say, look, 0 retention period, I'm not gonna hold you to it. You're free to go. Because you still have to provide them a list. Even if you have a 90-day retention period in there and you fail to provide them the list within 5 days after cancellation, then that retention period is void.
Most of the houses you've shown.
List of all the houses that you've had broker involvement in. Yeah, that's how you maintain your retention period. Okay. All right, let's see, additional buyer preferences and priorities. So if you check this box here, this is the form BIP, which used to be the materials issues form. So this is the form that they get to tell you what kind of house they're looking for. 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, big yard, small yard, pool, no pool, horse property, whatever. It's so part of your responsibilities when you enter into an agreement with the buyer is to try to find them to the best of their ability what they're looking for. this form helps you determine what that is. Okay, it's an optional form. You have to check into it. You have to opt into using the form. It's a great form though. If you're going to put together a nice buyer presentation and have them come in and sit down and explain to them all the reasons why they should use you, going through a BIPP is probably a really good way to create a feeling of them knowing that you really understand what they're looking for. All right, so it's not supposed to be a hindrance form. It's supposed to be a supporting form. Okay, anytime we talk about compensation, we always have to have the compensation statement. That's why it's here in bold red. The amount of rate of compensation between real estate agents and principals is not fixed by law. They're set by each broker individually and may be negotiated between buyer and the broker. Okay, standard. Now, it does refer to the attached form BCA. This is the one that is the broker compensation advisory. We've read this one before that talks about how people get paid. It's going to be part of this bundle. When you do a BRBC, it's going to be bundled with what's first, always agency, because you're moving into an agreement. So it has agency, and then there's going to be the broker compensation advisory, and then the BRBC. Those are going to be your bundle at this point in time. So it'll refer to that form. The amount of compensation. So it's going to be blank percent of the acquisition price and additional monies possibly, right? Maybe you have a transaction coordinating fee. Maybe your broker charges you a transaction fee. If they did, you would put that in there. You'd say 2.5% and $500 or whatever. Or you could just say blank dollars. Like, I'm going to go out and show you a house. I just want $5,000. I'm cool with just $5,000. Let's go in there. Right, fine, $5,000. Or pursuant to the compensation schedule attached, which is incorporated herein. So compensation schedule might say, if I'm going to go show you houses under 350,000, I want 3%. If for 300,000 to 500,000, I want 2.5%. If for 500,000 and above, I want 2%. So again, completely open for your guys' interpretation. You can adjust accordingly. Payments from third parties. So they shall be credited against the buyer's obligation to pay broker. So what does this mean? So I have a 3% agreement with my buyer. Somebody is offering compensation of 2.5%. It gets credited towards my buyer's obligation to pay me. So now my buyer is only obligated to pay me 0.5%, right? So it's just letting you know any third-party payments that come to the broker in regard to this transaction will deduct from what the buyer's obligated to pay me from this through this agreement. Does that make sense? Okay, broker shall not receive any amount in excess of paragraph 2D1. So here's 2D1. I put in 1% because I'm trying to undercut. Somebody's willing to offer 2.5, I get 1%. Okay, broker shall not receive any amount in excess. Okay, unless that amount is modified in a subsequent written agreement between broker and buyer at the time the overage amount is known. So that would go into a separate agreement. It could go into, I don't know what that agreement would look like yet. Still haven't got to that point. So if the broker has a listing agreement with the seller, see paragraph 4F. So paragraph 4F is down below. We'll take a look at that in a second. So again, this goes back to your point, Maggie. What if buyers all start going to
The listing agent.
listing agents? So this will talk about the payment from third parties. And basically what it says is the amount of money that the listing agent receives from the seller between their agreement does not get credited towards what the same agent's agreement with you as the buyer would be. Both have to be paid. Okay, so if I have 2.5, so if Maggie's the seller, Mariana's the buyer, I'm the agent, Maggie and I have a 2.5% agreement for me to sell her house, and I sign a 2% agreement with Mariana to buy a house, I'm still guaranteed 4.5%. She can't say, well, you're getting 2.5 from Maggie, so I owe you nothing. Right? No, they're separate. They're separate agreements for compensation.
Do you
Yes.
think a seller will be more willing to lean on towards accepting an offer that the BRBC is like $1,000?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Why wouldn't they be? Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's gonna be something we're gonna have to start
Yeah.
figuring into multiple offers now. How much is this ask for compensation? Now,
Mm-hmm.
it's possible, though, what happens if you're, so, I mean, that would be the case where your seller says, I'm willing to offer 2.5%. And then you get these offers that come in, one's at with the BRBC at 2.5%, and the other one's the BRBC at $1,000. I mean, I'm gonna go towards that $1,000 one, because even though I'm offering 2.5%, now I only have to give 1,000 of it, and the overage comes back to me, the seller. So that could be a multi-$1,000 difference. Could be huge. So yeah, for sure, for sure. So that's again another way to try to even the playing field. That piece of the language, which does not allow the overage to go to anybody except the seller, is really gonna like put the squash on buyers agents. Unless they really want to work for $1,000 all day. Pretty rough.
There used to be, and still is, a section where it says variable
Yeah, with variable rate.
rates, and that's sometimes I've taken listings, you know, at 5% and said, if I represent the buyer, then the commission will be reduced to 4.5% or 4%. You know, so that's a factor that the competition knows that there's some kind of a variable group.
So the variables kind of gonna disappear a little bit the way that the new residential listing agreement is written. You're gonna have an agreement with them to sell the home as their agent. That's not gonna change. But then there will be a section in there that says, in the case of dual agency. Now, where we had to really kind of parse it, because technically dual agency is, you have the listing, she has the buyer, that's dual agency. So the dual agency language is specifically if the same agent enters in the dual agency, then it's not necessarily what the compensating part will be. It's the part that you're going to get direct from your seller. Because if you're going to have an agreement with that buyer that you're representing, that's going to be separate again. So you could be with Maggie saying, Maggie, I sell your house for 2.5%, but if I personally bring the buyer, it'll drop to 2%, and then go out with Mariana and say 2.5%, Mariana. So now Maggie's going to pay you 2, she's paying you 2.5. And you can still then have the ability, you still have the ability though, to then ask Maggie to pay Mariana's commission that she owes you through closing costs. So it's,
But you
It's-
could also,
it's fun.
in that situation, I feel like, okay, if I'm representing you and I'm representing you, you're the seller, you're the buyer. You're 2%, you're 2%, but I tell you if I dual it, then it'll be 3% total, right? So 1.5, 1.5. But I have a BRBC with her and I have my seller's agreement with you. If we accept her offer, I could always do an addendum changing my commission
you can,
after the fact.
Oh.
So you can just promise
Absolutely.
your seller you'll do the addendum
yeah,
after.
you would be able to change it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, just from
You, because you write the offer, so
Uh-huh.
I'm so proud of you.
you're never gonna live it down for at least a month. But
It's a crown. It's a admiration.
okay, so we have any payments will be credited. Let's see, what else did we not read in here? Yeah, that we read it all. Okay, next one. We're on what is it? 2D3, continuation of right to compensation for broker involvement property. So again, this is where you can put in the number of days that say after our cancellation. I still hold you for a certain number of days for the specific properties that I provide. We'll read about that a little more below. Cancellation notice. So a non-exclusive, it's effective upon receipt, right? So if you have a non-exclusive and your seller didn't like you and they want to cancel, they cancel with you right away. If you don't like them, you can cancel on them. It's right away. Unless you want to make it a certain number of days, you would have to opt in. And then if you are in an exclusive, the very few times that you may ever find yourself in an exclusive, both sides have to choose to cancel. I'm pretty sure it's both sides. And then it's not effective for 30 days. It lasts for additional 30 days after you guys cancel it. Okay. This part's very interesting. Within 5 calendar days from the execution of this agreement, okay, that you have to be, the buyer has to fill out a BFPI. This is the buyer's financial and personal information form. Okay, this tells the agent where they're gonna get their money from. Is it in a bank? Is it a checking account? Is it where is the money? It tells them where's their job, who's their lender, are they pre-qualified? All of the things that you need to know to represent them properly financially are going to be in this form. So they're going to need to fill one of these out for you. Yeah, this is different. This is a different ballgame, guys. I mean, we're in agreements with. Think about when you have a listing agreement. Your seller tells you everything. They tell you everything you need to know. So just flip the tables on this, and now it's a buyer's agreement, and the buyers have to tell you everything you know. They also have to tell you if they intend on using a VA loan. Why?
Because
Any-
VA loans are subject to more stringent.
But in what way? What way are VA loans more stringent?
Can't pay commission.
VA buyers cannot pay commissions. Period. End of story. They can't use seller closing costs to pay commissions.
Are they
Can't.
gonna work on that, or it's just gonna be a thing?
We don't know. We thought they would start working on it. We haven't heard anything yet, but it's the VA,
Mhm.
right? The VA does everything slow. You go make an appointment for the VA to check on your broken foot, and it'll fall off by the time you get in. So the VA moves a little slow. And so if they are using a VA loan, they can't pay you. So what does that mean? You've got to find houses where the seller's
Seller's gonna
willing to
pay.
pay you. Right? If you go find a house, they fall in love with the house and the seller's not willing to pay, you might not be able to represent them because you won't get paid. You'll
Can
be
they-
able to back
Can
out.
they pay you like, not from the loan that they're getting, but from their personal account?
Outside of escrow.
Yeah, then they're doing it outside of escrow, then it becomes illegal. It's a illegal payment. You don't really want to go down that road.
Can the seller only agree to just pay VA commission, not everybody else?
Seller could agree to pay whatever they want. Yeah, right?
But they can like
Absolutely.
differentiate.
I'm probably telling my sellers right now, if you don't want to pay compensation, then we just do it we'll do it offer specific. Like, how good's the offer? The offer's great. You want to pay? Cool, we'll pay. Your offer sucks? Yeah, we're not gonna give you any money. Like, they can make that decision. I'm not locking them into anything.
Sarah
Right?
and Randy are.
Like as far as close, so if they don't want to offer compensation but are willing to give concessions, that amount of concessions, closing costs help to pay the buyer's burden can vary. It can vary per offer. You want $10,000 in closing costs to pay your buyer's commission, well, then your offer better be good. Don't ask for 20,000 off the purchase price and $10,000 to pay. No, you want 20,000 off, you pay your guy. So they can do whatever they want. There's nothing that is going to lock them in unless you specifically lock them in the listing agreement. So, because it says right there, cooperating compensation, if any, and it allows you to pick a variable rate you could leave it open-ended. Or they could say no, but I'm willing to pay concessions.
What's the
Right.
difference between concessions and commission?
I thought you said you weren't allowed to use that word.
Yeah, it turned into
Commission.
commission.
Well, compensation, difference between concessions and compensation. Compensation is the word they want us to use now for commissions. Concessions are closing costs.
Oh.
So, yeah, so you'd have to ask for them. Right? So if I'm offering compensation and I'm not posting it in the MLS, but I tell you that we're offering compensation, then it's gonna come through escrow as commissions. But if I'm not offering compensation, but I'm open to concessions, then you as a buyer's agent have to ask for those closing costs.
Okay, great, I'll tell my
So
son.
it ends
that's
up
the
being the
buyer.
same thing for the buyer, it's out of pocket.
It's still a third-party payment, so it still credits to their obligation to pay you.
I don't know.
You're breathing heavy over there.
Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause I
it's
thought
confusing.
You either have to decide right there and then, not you can choose who you wanna, who the seller.
Sessions, closing costs, we've never had to, currently, do we have to determine at the time of listing if they're gonna pay closing costs? No. It's offer specific. Some offers ask, some don't. We can negotiate the amount of closing costs. They ask for 2.5%, we counter back with 1%. You know, so it's the same kind of thing. So if your seller doesn't offer compensation, cooperating compensation, then a buyer always has the right to ask them for concessions, always. Because if you have a buyer broker agreement in place, this agreement and the promise to pay compensation becomes a closing cost, right? The buyer has to bring it to the closing table with their down payment, everything, and all their taxes and insurance. So now if it's just yet another closing cost and I'm asking the seller to pay $10,000 in closing costs, now I have a third party payment that credits my buyer, right? Making sense a little
So
better?
going back to the VA loan though,
Mm-hmm.
but if the VA person can't pay commission, we also can't do this either, right?
So in the VA, a VA buyer can receive concessions from a seller, but the concessions cannot be used to pay compensation. It can be used to pay everything else, the lending fee, taxes, insurance, all that
So
stuff, but
always
not
has to be
compensation.
By the seller, always.
Yeah,
Commission has to be by the seller.
with the VA, yeah, so you would have to negotiate it direct to the seller, not through concessions, right? Which means if a seller isn't willing to pay, or a seller isn't willing to pay enough, you have a decision to make. If you have an agreement with your VA buyer at 2.5 and the house is only offering 1.5, that's all you're gonna get. Unless you can negotiate direct with that seller.
Randy and Sharon are having issues.
They're having issues. Are you having issues? Oh, they fell off. Why did
Yeah.
they fall off? There's Sharon.
Yeah, we're here, but Randy's having trouble getting in.
Is there even a point to do a BRBC with a VA loan?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
yes, there is a point to
Right?
do a BRBC with the VA. And that point would be that you have to establish what your compensation is going to be so that you can ask for it from the seller. Because if you don't have a BRBC in place, you can't ask the seller for direct payment. You have to have a BRBC in place.
Kind of sounds like vets are screwed.
yeah.
Right now, yeah, right
Who's
now.
gonna wanna
vets are
take
screwed.
them over somebody else? Like, why
Mhm.
should I take you if I have to, if the seller's like, what,
Yeah.
why should I take your offer? If I have. to
Unless
pay?
it's somebody was a vet, sometimes they'll bend and say, hey, I want this vet, cause I'm a vet.
Sure.
Yeah, that does
Even
happen a
now,
lot also.
Yeah.
Charge for vets.
Which is oddly enough, technically a fair housing.
Well, they should,
violation.
yeah,
But we're telling them that we're a vet because we're writing an offer with the VA loan.
exactly.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Apologize, I came in late,
Mhm.
but if in fact the seller is offering compensation to the buyer's agent, makes no difference with the VA, does it?
Correct. If the seller is offering compensation, it will make no difference. That's why you have to have your BRBC in place and you're dealing directly with the seller to pay your compensation. Now, in a situation where the seller is offering compensation and you have a VA buyer, is the VA buyer paying your compensation? No, the seller is.
Right.
But if the seller isn't and you ask for closing costs and that concession comes from the seller, now you cannot get paid from the VA buyer because it's now his closing cost money and he cannot allocate any of it towards your compensation. Okay, now the buyer, does the buyer have sufficient funds to pay the broker? That's going to be a question now. Like, hey, look, if we sign this agreement at 2.5% and we go and look at a house and they're not offering anything, are you going to be able to pay me? You have to show me your proof of funds
Mhm.
that you have the
Okay,
funds.
all of that before you even show the house?
Yeah,
We
supposedly.
need to educate our listings ourselves.
Mhm.
Because this is bizarre
Yeah.
up here. We can't.
Yeah,
Do you know how many
It's
people call
crazy.
Zillow and they wanna see something like right now?
and they're gonna
Right
have, you
now.
can't, they have to sign one of
You
these.
know, it's like,
They have to sign one of
Did
these.
that the other
with
day, and I was
So did
thinking about
I.
this, I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to do this anymore, it's
Yeah.
weird.
right.
This really is putting a giant wrench in Zillow's business model. I'll tell you that right now. Yeah, Zillow's like,
Something
"Oh,
to talk
shit."
about tomorrow.
Yeah,
You bet.
right. So So they gotta be able to show you they have sufficient funds. If they check this box and say they do not have sufficient funds, again, I'm gonna be taking them out and trying to show them houses where I'm gonna get compensated from the seller, but if they fall in love with the house that has zero compensation, I have the right to cancel this agreement and say, you are on your own. Good luck. You chose a house where I'm not getting paid.
So can't you just go to the seller of that house, find out first before you go, and then,
Sure, or you can even try to negotiate it,
yeah,
right? You can write an offer asking for them to pay, but if they say no,
yeah, then.
they cancel out any compensation to you and your buyer's like, yeah, I see you're not getting paid, but I still want to buy the house.
Mm.
All right, I'm out. I can leave if I want to. Otherwise, I'm working for free.
Mm.
Right?
So many people are doing that.
Yeah, it's why though? Why would you say buy?
15
Right, 'cause-
houses and this is the one I-
Because you're not getting paid and you're still responsible for any issue. Right? Because
Gosh, I really feel like we're gonna have to have like even more conversations with the listing agent, like, look, you're gonna have to be willing to compensate or else. this isn't
100%.
gonna
You're
get
gonna
sold. This
when
is
you
gonna be on the
call
list.
when
This is
you
gonna
this
be on
this is the
seller.
telephone call now. Hey, I want to go see the house on 123 Pine Street. All right, cool. 123 Pine Street. Agent answers, hi, this is Josh. I want a buyer wants to go in and see your house. Hey, by the way, are you guys offering any compensation or concessions? That's going to be every single conversation when you make that.
And then
appointment.
like, and then you go, so are you willing to pay my commission? I don't think I'll have the money. Well, the house that you wanna see, they're not willing to either. So moving forward, what else would you like to go look
I have a
at?
question. So if I'm the seller, listing agent, right, and then you bring me the buyer, and then your buyer can pay, so you're like, goodbye, but I already have your buyer's information because of the offer. Can I reach out to your buyer and say, hey, I can represent you for $1,000, then you're just adding on to your sellers?
That's a good question. I don't
Oh,
know.
Something
Yeah.
to bring to the board
Yeah,
again.
that's something we'll go talk about. Correct, possible. Yeah, it's
So we'll be
possible.
losing our clients to the listing agents a lot.
Well, only
They
the
don't
ones
have
that
their
can't
information.
pay. I mean, that's a very specific situation though. So you're talking about a buyer who can't afford to pay you and you've gone to a listing who isn't gonna pay you no matter what.
Right.
And so
We
you,
say no.
yeah,
Mhm.
and then you walk away and yeah, they're gonna have the buyer's name. They won't have their telephone number or their email address, but they'll have their name. That's gonna be about it. So maybe that, I mean, you could track them down on social media, be posting on Tehachapi.house. Hey, if your name's such and such and you wrote an offer, give me a call.
Or
Yeah,
the-
That- that
or the
wouldn't
buyer can
surprise
come
me.
directly to me after the fact.
yeah, after the fact. Okay,
So if
Go ahead.
your buyer is only looking for vacant land, I mean, they can go look at it without you,
correct.
but you still would wanna have this. How do you explain to them, well, you don't need me to show it to you, but you should have this in place so I can represent you if you decide to make an offer?
So if you have this in place, though, you really should be standing on each piece of vacant land with them. Because now you have an obligation to them, you're representing them. So, is this gonna stop people from looking at vacant land without an agent there? Never. People are always. Heck, man, before I became an agent and knew better, I was breaking into houses all the time that were listed. I'd go to the back door, oh, look, it's open, let's go. I give myself the self-tour all the time back in the day. So people are still gonna do that kind of stuff. But no, the point of this, I mean, honestly, I know we're looking at this as like, holy smokes, this is a huge road bump
Mhm.
that we're bumping into and we're all trying to figure out how are we gonna do this? If we shift this paradigm for a second and say to ourselves, this is gonna make us more professional. This is going to make us work with a higher level of ethics, a higher level of professionalism. This is the way we should have been doing this stuff all the time. This BRBC has been around for years. Just because nobody was using it doesn't mean it was wrong. It just meant that we were all lazily getting that Zillow call and just going and showing an unqualified buyer some house just because we wanted to get a client. So this is just, I mean, so try to flip it like that for a second. Try to put that into your head as much as possible. We're just trying to bring some professionalism back to the industry. You guys don't look happy that I said that. Okay,
That sounds all pie in the sky.
it does.
Yeah.
Doesn't that sound lovely?
Mhm.
No, it doesn't.
We'll go over the key facts here. We won't read everything because some of it's stuff we've seen before. Clearly the stuff in red is stuff that has been rewritten, is being added. The The red's kind of been there for a bit. If it's something even newer than the red, it's written in blue. So that's how we look at these forms. But again, when we talk about compensation, there's our little line again. It's not fixed by law. It is negotiable. So we're telling people over and over and over and over again that it's negotiable, and yet we're still in a lawsuit. Lovely. Buyer has been advised of how much a broker is compensated in a real estate transaction, and who compensates the broker is negotiable. This is going to be in that form, the broker compensation advisory. Okay, so let's talk about non-exclusive representation. So this is the one that defaults as. This is the one we're going to be in the majority of the time. Compensation is payable only if there was broker involvement with the property. So what is broker involvement? It's defined. Any one of the following, not all of the following, it's any one of the following 5. The buyer physically entered and was shown the property by the agent, right? We did a showing, took them to the house. That's considered broker involvement. I've qualified to be paid. Broker showed the property to a buyer virtually. Okay, I'm on my FaceTime, I'm in the house, I'm showing them the property. Okay, I'm on a Zoom call and I'm showing them properties on the MLS and I'm analyzing them. Okay, that actually I think is coming up here in a second. Broker submitted to the seller a signed written offer from the buyer to acquire the property. So I've written an offer. That's broker involvement. So if they call me and say, I saw this house online, it looks great, it's exactly what I want, can you write me the offer? That's broker involvement. I don't have to show it to them first. Okay, but before I write that offer, I gotta get a BRBC. Okay. Broker performed a market analysis related to the property or reviewed property-specific documents or disclosures with the buyer. And the property was introduced to the buyer by the broker for which the broker acted on the buyer's behalf. So I introduced it to him somehow. This again could be me on Zoom showing them properties and analyzing them. Now, however, huge sentence, however, merely sending the buyer a list of properties shall not be deemed broker involvement without documented action on the part of the broker analyzing the property for the buyer specifically, or assisting the buyer in the potential acquisition of the property, or communicating with the seller or seller's agent regarding the buyer's potential acquisition of the property. So signing them up on a portal and sending them properties through an email system that does it automatically does not include broker involvement. Saying, sign up on my website so that you see what's out there is not broker involvement. That does not count. Yes, Terry.
This changes the procuring costs.
This really does try to eliminate procuring costs, because procuring costs, number one, you have to have a BRBC now for
Yeah,
procuring
but in
costs.
the past, just taking them to all the properties in Bear Valley, showing them the particular house, pulling up all the information about the flood zones and taking them into the CSD was not procuring costs in the past.
In the past, it is now. Absolutely. You have a BRBC in place and you go do all those lovely things with them, and they buy any one of those properties and you have it documented, these are the properties, you are now procuring costs. Yeah. Yeah, we should have less procuring cause issues for sure. Okay, so that is our non-exclusive. This one here is only in the very few possible chances that you might ever end up in exclusive representation. This agreement shall be exclusive and irrevocable, right? So you can't just unilaterally cancel it. It's got to either expire or we have to agree to get out of it together. Broker will devote time and resources to assist the buyer in finding and acquiring a property in the expectation of being paid for the broker's services. It says in bold, broker is entitled to compensation if the buyer acquires a property during the representation period with or without broker involvement, even if another broker is also entitled to be paid for representing the buyer. So be careful. There are going to be some agents out there that aren't even going to tell their clients that they've checked the exclusive box. And these people are going to be signing exclusive agreements, not to their knowledge. And then they're going to be coming to you and they're going to be saying, I don't believe I'm in an exclusive, so
Can we call?
you can call the other agent, because the other agent must give them a copy right? You can't do these agreements and then not share them with your clients. Your clients have the right to have copies of all of these agreements so they can bring them to you. So you can read them, so you can see, are they in an exclusive or in a non-exclusive? All right, they can't withhold those documents from their clients. That would be unethical.
You
would
think
be-
chances are the buyer will lie about having a BRBC with another agent?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, because they're not going to know any different. They're going to be like, I don't want to pay
Yeah, who
two people,
cares?
so I'm not going to tell them about this one. I'm going to
I
give you
just wanna
this
see the
one.
house.
So,
Yeah.
so again, during that intake meeting you have with them, you need to explain to them why it's important to tell me whether or not you have one of these, because it could make the situation worse for you. Question?
No.
No, just adjusting your glasses? Okay, all right. Now, a buyer includes any person or entity other than the broker related to the buyer who in any manner acts on behalf of the buyer to acquire the property. So that means if Lacey is married and she signs the agreement with me, but her husband is the one that writes the contract, it's still Lacey because he's somebody related to her who's acting in the manner of her, or a family member, a parent. This really comes more into play when you have LLCs and multiple managing members. It doesn't matter which one signed the agreement. All of the members of the LLC are bound to the agreement, right? Trusts, same thing. If you're a trustee and you sign, the other trustees or any successor trustees are also bound by that agreement. So it's not just, you can't try to get around it by saying, well, I mean, my wife signed that agreement with you. I didn't. And now I want to go buy it with this person over here. No, you're the same person, right? You're the same person. Continuation of right to compensation for broker involved properties. So the broker shall continue to be entitled for compensation if within the time specified. Remember, this is that I can put the number of days that after we cancel, I'm going to retain the right. If it's either the time specified or if there is a cancellation within the same amount of time after the effective date of the cancellation, buyer enters into an agreement for a property which there was broker involvement. This is the caveat. Prior to the expiration of this agreement or any extension thereof, within 5 days after the effective date of the cancellation, the broker delivers to buyer written notice of those properties for which there was broker involvement. So we have this form called the NBIP, which probably stands for Notice of Broker Involved Properties. Okay, so this is the list I'm giving you. We're canceling our agreement, but I have a 30-day retention period. I have 5 days after the cancellation to give you the list of all the houses that I still get paid for. Okay. This pretty standard. Compensation is payable upon any resulting transaction and payable through escrow. So that goes to Darla's question. Can't I just take this money on the side? You're not supposed to. Gotta get paid through the proper channels. So I get paid at the completion of a successful transaction. I also get paid if the completion is prevented by default of the buyer, right? So the buyer defaults. How does the buyer default? So buyer, well, no, if he doesn't get approved for the loan and we cancel based on the inability to get approved for the loan, that's not a default. The buyer is canceling within his rights to cancel. Now, if a buyer, I'd have to find out. So for whatever reason, everything's good and they just like, hey, I don't want to buy this. They're being prevented. I'm trying to think on the default, whether or not that means like if they received a notice to perform and they didn't perform and then the seller canceled, that's a buyer default. So you would get paid for that. If the acquisition is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the buyer, when the buyer collects damages by suit, settlement, or otherwise. So the seller decides, I don't want to sell. I'm not going to sell. You can't make me close. And the transaction cancels. Seller cancels it in bad faith. And then, so that would be a case where you could go to the seller and say, well, you owe me now because you canceled in default. Or your buyer sues the seller for non-performance and wins a suit. Then depending on how much your buyer wins, your buyer owes you some of that money too. So let's say you have an agreement with your buyer for $10,000 and they sue the seller and they win $20,000 settlement. you get 10 of it. Okay, so these are very rare situations, unless you live in San Diego, Orange County, San Jose, San Francisco.
It
This stuff happens
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Because, why? Because these commissions are massive. These
Right, those are
commissions are on,
$1 million
like, yeah,
homes,
$2-3 million
like,
home,
at
and
the
you're
least.
gonna make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. You better believe you're gonna sue for it. Yeah, here, you know, we got a $6,000, we have a tendency to slide by some of that stuff every now and then. Okay, let's see where else here. Accounting for payments to broker if broker also represents the seller. So this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. This is F. Notwithstanding paragraph 2D, if the broker has a listing agreement with the seller of the property to be purchased, no credit towards the buyer compensation obligation shall be given for the amount due to the broker by the seller, or the compensation broker is owned as the seller's agent. Okay, so again, does that, I know that kind of sounds crazy. So let's go back. We got Lindsay and we got Trace. Lindsay is the seller, Trace is the buyer. I'm the agent. I have both of them. Now, no credit towards Trace's compensation. She's the buyer. Trace's obligation to pay me. I have an agreement with Trace, pay me 2%. No credit shall be given to her due broker by the seller. So let's say, I'm getting lost now. No credit towards the buyer's compensation obligation shall be given for the amount due to the broker, due to me by Lindsay. So Lindsay owes me separately than Trace owes me. So because there is that thing that says if I receive compensation from a third party, that it is deducted from what Trace owes me, unless I'm in an agreement with the seller, because now I have two separate agreements. I have an agreement for the seller to pay me, an agreement for the buyer to pay me. The seller's amount that the seller pays me does not get deducted off the amount that the buyer has to pay me. These are two separate agreements. The only time that works is when I only have one agreement with the buyer only to pay. Then if the seller pays me direct, then it's deducted off what the buyer owes me because I only have one agreement in place. But if I have the buyer and the seller, I have two agreements in place. They stand separate from one another. The seller's payment to me does not deduct off the buyer's obligation. I think I explained it better that time. Sometimes I got to do it 4 or 5 times. Yes, you have a look on your face.
I do, cause how is that kind of the same if, let's say, if I'm the buyer's agent, she's the buyer, right, and we have an agreement, she's gonna pay me 2%, but then the listing agent's only gonna pay 1%? No, if I'm gonna get paid 1% by her, but the listing agent's only gonna be paying 2%, why is it that I only have to get 1%?
Because
Why can't
you
it be
only,
added? 'Cause
no,
it's
you
all-
own, because you don't have an agreement with the seller direct. Because you're not the listing agent. You only have an agreement here, so you can only get paid the maximum of what your agreement is. You have
On
one
this
agreement.
form, whatever you decided, 1,000.
That's
The-
there because other agents will be putting like $50
Mhm. Exactly.
when the,
So there's a difference now. In your scenario, you have one agreement.
right.
You have an agreement with the buyer. In this other scenario, I have two agreements in place. I have one with the seller and one with the buyer. Now, I might say to my seller, if I represent the buyer, I'm going to lessen your obligation. Your 2.5 that you were supposed to pay me will now drop to 2. But with the buyer, it's still the same. I'm
But
not
at that
telling.
point, can you still try to negotiate to get the full 2.5%?
Well,
What
so
kind of
so basically, if your seller was willing to offer, say you went into a deal and the seller said, I'll give you 2.5 and I'm willing to compensate 2.5.
Mhm.
And you go, hey, cool, great. And if I bring that buyer, I'll drop you down to 2. They're not saying they're not still going to pay that 2.5. They're just saying, hey, between you and me, it drops to 2. Now I bring in the buyer and I have a 2.5%, and I got 4.5 now instead of 5. I don't have to renegotiate that. The only time I have to renegotiate that is if I signed a 3 with my buyer, and then my seller is only willing to pay 2.5. Then I could try to renegotiate that 3. But why? Why would I? I've already knocked their 2.5 down to 2. Just take the 4.5 and run. I've already saved them 0.5%. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
A little confusing.
It is confusing. It's gonna be confusing until we get out there and actually practice it.
And we'll say, Josh, we got this situation.
Yeah, you're like,
Right.
hey, tell me again, how does that go? Who represents who?
Yeah, so-
Oh,
So what if you had a buyer's representation though, and you were only charging your buyer 1% though? So
mhm.
that way you still have an agreement between the seller.
Okay,
the
so if I
buyer-
have a 2.5% agreement with the seller, Lindsay, and I have a 1% agreement with
the
Lacey, the
Mhm.
buyer, but I tell Lindsay if I double ended, I'll drop her 2.5 to 2.
Let's not drop anything.
Okay,
We're not dropping anything, but your
Okay.
seller said, I'm willing to compensate the buyer's agent 2.5 too.
but I
you have-
signed my agreement with the
Right,
buyer for
there's like
1.
3 different agreements.
So you
going
only
back
get
and
one.
forth.
No, there's
You
only
only
2
get one.
agreements. It's only 2 agreements. Okay, the seller says they'll pay 2.5. They'll pay up to 2.5. But if I have an agreement for 1 with the buyer, I can't get paid more than 1.
Mhm.
So I get 2.5 from my seller and 1 from the buyer, from the seller. Complete from the seller. Seller owes me 3.5, not 5.
Cause you're double ending?
But then, so that second agreement that you, because if you didn't have a buyer, you have those 2 agreements you're saying, right?
Okay, so you're the seller.
I
Let's do it this
understand
way.
it,
So-
but you're saying 2 agreements that I don't. see
Correct,
the
you're
2
the
agreements.
seller. We've agreed that you're gonna pay me 2.5,
Okay,
and we've agreed that you're gonna compensate 2.5.
right.
That's the agreement. Now, she's the buyer.
Okay,
I go sign a second agreement with her that says, I'm gonna represent you for 1%, because I'm bringing you to this listing.
Are you
Okay.
double ending?
Yeah, I'm double ending,
Okay,
1%.
uh-huh.
I go back to you and go, I have a buyer, 1%. You owe me how much? 2.5.
2.5.
How much is the maximum I can get paid for the buyer?
1,000,
1%. 1%. So it's 3.5, not the 5 that you were willing to pay. I just saved you.
But why did you do that? Why did you like, if you knew she was gonna give that, why did you
I
negotiate?
probably
1%
wouldn't. We're just
between-
playing her hypothetical world. If I know she's gonna pay 2.5%.
Right, why is there an?
I'm probably gonna negotiate this at 2.5%, and then I'm gonna come to you and say, I'm representing both sides. We've already agreed, you're paying me 2.5%. Oh, and you also already said you were gonna pay 2.5% to a cooperating. It just happens to be me. I get all of it.
Here's my
Right?
question. So seller is willing to pay 5% total, right? 2.5 to both sides.
Mhm.
But you signed with your buyer, you're not, this is not dual agency, 1%.
Mhm.
Okay, so now she owes 1% to the buyer.
Mhm.
But can you negotiate at that point to get the full 2.5% because you know she was willing to pay that?
No,
You cannot
because
negotiate that.
No, because you have to, when you try to negotiate additional payments from the seller, you have to provide your BRBC. And it's gonna say 1, and you can't get paid more than it says. This is why you cannot sign your BRBCs for so little. So you can't sign your BRBC for diddly squat, expecting to go out and get paid. No, if you sign it for nothing, you're gonna get
You have to
paid
be
nothing.
confident in
Yeah.
what you charge and from the
Correct.
very.
Even if you know they're willing to give you more. You have, so in the
I
contract,
would
when you,
find out
when you
before.
check
yeah.
that box, the 3G3 or whatever it is that says you're asking the seller direct for payment, and it makes you fill out the SPBB, the seller to pay the buyer's broker, SPBB, seller pay buyer's broker. You have to give them a copy of your BRBC, and then the math equations right there. It's like,
Signed before the offer.
gotta be
right?
signed, yeah, the BRBC has to be, and they all will be signed before the offer now, because you have to have them signed before you show them.
So each different,
July.
Well, in July.
so for each listing that you're gonna go show, you would have different amounts on these BR.
Yeah.
You say, Josh, what are you gonna compensate? He's gonna say 2, and so, okay, 1, 2, 3 Pine Street, 2%.
Good, absolutely. That's why we were
Then the
talking
next
about
one, okay,
having the ability
What are you
to
gonna
have
give me?
a
Oh.
list of houses and different compensation schedules. You could absolutely do that.
What if the seller tells, or agent, listing agent
I
tells you
Don't love
the
real estate
compensation depends on what the offer is? So you don't have anything.
If they
to-
tell you what,
what the offer's gonna be.
oh, like we'll compensate based on the offer?
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of more like a concessions. We're looking at every offer and we're offering concessions dependent on your offer.
Which makes sense.
Good luck. Have fun. Better write a good one. Yeah, better write a good offer. You better be close to asking price and probably not asking more than 2.5%. You know, yeah, and you better have your BRBC in place going into that.
So who needs to receive a copy of the BRBC?
So it used to be that it had to go through escrow. Now the way that this is all gonna be written, the listing agent can ask the buyer's agent direct to give them a copy.
So
Yeah, they have to provide it.
Is a violation if you don't provide it?
Well, then it's like, I don't have to sign this SPBB if I don't know what it is. You can't, I have to have all the information in front of me before I can negotiate that.
Like, why play hardball? Like, it should just be a nice.
Simple, right? Like,
Yeah.
Sure.
It used to be simple.
I mean,
used to.
I've only been in this for a few years, but yeah, I can imagine how difficult it can get. I just feel like,
Gonna get sneaky.
really?
It's gonna be sneaky for a while until people end up in court. Yeah, and then they'll stop being sneaky. Or until they stop
And
making
who's
money.
gonna be sneaky? Everyone?
I could,
Not here, I don't think.
we could, not up here, we can go down to LA and swing a dead cat and hit 20 of them.
Right,
They're all over the place down there.
right, but not,
Constant.
you know, we're in a
Yeah.
safe area. I don't-
But they're gonna be coming up here, the LA
Yeah, they will be
agents.
coming up here. They will be
And
coming
they're
up
gonna
here.
be
So
going-
we'll see.
Swarmy. It's gonna be swarmy.
You haven't heard that one before?
Yeah.
Yeah, swing a dead cat. Did I age myself?
I've never heard.
I
You
like
never
it.
heard, you can swing a dead cat and get 20.
No.
That's an old saying. Somebody's got to know that saying. All right, maybe it's a San Diego thing. I don't know.
I think Josh has his own.
Why not swing a dead dog? Why it's gotta be? a
Okay,
cat?
so
Oh, you're newbie?
4G, third-party payments, right? Third-party payments, less than buyer compensation obligations. So if the buyer owes the broker compensation after first deducting payments due to broker from third parties, broker and buyer shall discuss the potential benefits and detriments of including a term in any offer buyer makes obligating seller to pay broker directly through escrow for any compensation that the buyer owes broker. Okay, so this is, the conversation is, you owe me 2.5%, they are offering 2. Do you want me to ask the seller for the other 0.5%, or do you want to pay it yourself? That's what this paragraph is stating. That's the conversation. The buyer's got to know that you're going to go ask the other side, and it could weaken your offer. Okay, because you're asking for more compensation. Okay.
They're the ones paying for it.
At the end of the day, the buyer is always paying for it. They're going out and getting a loan that's covering everything,
Exactly.
right? I mean, that conversation goes both ways. Seller's like, oh, I'm paying for all these fees. No, the buyer, if you price your house accordingly, the buyer's paying for it with their loan. So who knows? Okay, disclosure of anticipated payments through to broker by others. So again, this is going to be yet another form. So the broker at the earliest practical time prior to writing an offer on a property will disclose to buyer the amount of compensation that the broker expects to receive from a third party on that property to by buyer, providing them either with a copy of the CBC, right, cooperating broker compensation agreement, or in other type of writing, could be a website offer, it could be anything showing an offer of compensation, or on a separate document such as the ABCD, the anticipated broker compensation disclosure. So what does this mean? I'm getting ready to write an offer. We have an agreement for 3%, and I'm getting ready to write an offer, and I know the compensation is going to be 2%. I have to notify my buyer as fast as possible. Hey, you owe me 3, they're offering 2. And I got this form to give it to you, either by the CBC or an ABCD. Here's the form, you know, we're going into this, and this is what the payment schedule looks like. So you could be on the hook for 1%. Or would you like me to ask for the other 1% or 0.5% or whatever? Okay, you also have the right as a buyer's agent to say, you owe me 3, they're offering 2. We're good. Let's go back and modify our BRBC and make it 2%. I'm not going to be that agent. I mean, you do whatever, you know, there's a lot of options here, guys. So the broker independently or through escrow will disclose the final compensation that the broker receives from anyone other than the buyer. It has, so you can't receive quiet private payments and not tell your buyer and obligate them to pay you the full amount. That's illegal. If the third party does not pay as anticipated, and the third party has contractually agreed with the buyer to pay all or part of the broker's compensation, the buyer assigns to the broker any rights the buyer has to pursue the third party for such compensation. So if the seller has written in a written agreement to pay me and they don't, you as the buyer are authorizing me to go after them. Okay, all right. Because why? Why do you have to authorize that? Because the agreement's between me and you, buyer, you're supposed to pay me. And now that third party didn't do their job, they didn't pay me, now I can go after that third party, because it's really, I'm going after that third party on your behalf because you're the one that owes me the money, buyer.
How about the escrows part in this? The escrow will have,
Absolutely. They should have all of the agreements and it should all come out of proceeds.
proceeds,
Yeah.
and so the fact that the seller has decided, nope, I'm not going to put the compensation in, it's already in the contractual thing that escrow has, so escrow would have to get. Tell me how that would.
They would have to like, everybody would have to agree on a new set of escrow instructions, so that really wouldn't work. But this could be, not every, Northern California does their transactions different than Southern California. They use different kind of closing agencies and policies. There could also be a third party, a different third party. Third party isn't necessarily seller. Third party could be a broker agreeing to pay us, right? So maybe you have an agreement with your seller for a 5% commission, and the seller isn't offering compensation, but the broker was going to offer compensation. And now that broker decides no longer going to offer that compensation. Now I would be suing the broker, not the seller. So third parties can be more than one person, right?
How many people really are in question about everything?
Most of them.
When does this
Because it
rule
sounds
start?
like-
When? In July?
July
It
15-ish.
sounds like we could still have the seller offer compensation.
You
of
just
the
can't,
total, and
you just can't list it in the MLS.
correct.
So
This is-
you go talk to
Yeah, this is.
Josh and say, how much are you gonna pay me?
Yeah.
And then you put
Is
it on your,
Yeah,
Broker
when
form.
you go to call that listing, is your seller offering compensation? That's gonna be the question.
Okay, because my new listing that I'm getting in a week, I already went through, I charge you, and you can pay the buyer's agent whatever you would like, or I can increase this percentage and we will pay the buyer's agent, but they need to be compensated.
Wait, increase your percentage? and then
Yeah,
you
because it doesn't
pay?
matter where it comes from. It can come directly from the seller or it can come from the broker.
Okay, so Terry could say I charge 5%,
Mhm.
and 2 of that is gonna go, no,
I charge 2.5%.
right?
But I highly recommend that we offer a percentage to the buyer's
Sure.
agent for
Mhm.
showing your house, because you've got a big honking property.
Right.
And
It's in their
so
best interest to offer they
the
paid it the
easiest
whole
thing to
time for
do
years, like,
would be to increase the commission for listing to 4.5. And Downtown Country Real Estate will pay the buyer's agent
So then,
2%.
but then my question would come back to you as this. So let's say we did that. We took a listing for 4.5%. And we're saying, okay, now we're gonna pay 2. But now I got a buyer who comes in with a representation agreement that's at 1. I can only pay them 1. Now I just made 3.5. Well, I think,
Bad?
yeah, because I think you might have sellers coming back at you saying, wait, you kept 3.5 on that? It was only supposed to be 2.5. You told me to raise it to 4.5 so that we could offer 2.
But I could drop it back down. I'll tell them they're only getting 1%. And that means that at the 4.5, I would get 3.5. Are you okay with that? Or do you
So
want
the
to
listing
do
agreement will
straight?
allow you to put the 2.5. The listing agreement will allow you to put the 2.5 and the 2 in it. It's still going to uncouple the commissions and allow them to put that in there.
For me.
Sounds like
Why
this,
not?
yeah.
Yeah, I would just say be careful there. There could be some pitfalls to that as
No,
well.
well, I don't need more than 2.
Correct, but then have them say,
125.
have them tell you what they want to offer and to just keep that separate. Keep it separate in the listing agreement. Don't glob it all into yours. Keep it, split it out. And in that case, when you are offering 2 and somebody comes in with only an obligation of 1, then you don't have to change anything. Your seller automatically keeps the overage. Seller's gonna always keep the overage on commissions.
Where are you gonna be putting that in the listing agreement
You're
now?
not.
You will, no, you will. It's in the listing agreement. So,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it is in the listing agreement.
Okay.
I'd have to go back.
Is it
I
gonna,
can,
it's not gonna be changed,
so the listing agreement is gonna be different.
right?
It's gonna be totally different. Now, let
Okay.
me, see if I can find that. I mean, we're pretty much to the end of this here as far as we need to be. I think here just talks about cancellation. Here advisory regarding signing multiple representation agreements, right? The buyer is advised if another broker showed buyer the property virtually, in person, or wrote an offer or otherwise acted on the buyer's behalf of that property, even under a non-exclusive agreement, the buyer may owe compensation to that broker if the buyer purchases the property. So again, this is language, it's an advisory to let our buyers know, hey, you have to tell me if you have other compensation agreements out there, because if you do have compensation agreements out there, you could be putting yourself into a situation where you owe multiple